Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is my colleague, Forbes senior editor, Dan Alexander. Dan, thanks so much for coming on.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me.
You're a very popular guy over the past few weeks. You are probably, arguably, the most knowledgeable person on what we are going to talk about, and that is Trump's fraud case. Specifically, you were in the room when his daughter, Ivanka Trump, took the stand to testify. What can you tell us?
Well, Ivanka basically has the opposite demeanor of her father on the stand. She's extremely careful, very polished. She, said that she couldn't remember a lot of information. She did seem to have a pretty sharp memory about things that would not be damaging to her father or the family business. But overall, I don't think gave the state much ammunition with her testimony. The problem for her is that the state already has a pile of documents that put her right at the center of dealing with some of these loans involved in the lawsuit, particularly ones at the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., and also the golf resort down in Miami at Doral.
I want to talk about that convenient forgetting. There seems to be a lot of convenient forgetting in this Manhattan courthouse in this specific trial. And when a witness says that they don't remember on the stand, but there's an arsenal of documents, what is the mood? What is the tenor in the courtroom like?
At this point, it's pretty expected. Both Ivanka, but also her brothers, Don Jr. and Eric, have over and over again said that they couldn't remember things. What happens is that they say that they can't recall a particular document or a particular moment or something like that. The state then brings up an email or another document showing their personal involvement in that moment or that document, and then asks them a series of questions about it. Typically, the Trumps then, as they're looking through the email, say, "Sorry, I just don't recall this particular email or this particular exchange. Yes, I knew that we did this kind of business, but I don't remember this specific one." Where it gets really interesting is at certain times they seem to kind of slip up. So, for instance, in one moment of Ivanka's testimony, they were asking her about an application for a $50 million loan with Deutsche Bank in early 2016. Ivanka said that she couldn't recall the process of asking for that loan, but then later in the conversation said, "Well, I don't think that we got this loan," suggesting that in fact she could recall something about this loan. So there are moments like that where their credibility seems to be more questionable than others. Obviously, many of these things happened 8-10 years ago, and you wouldn't necessarily expect somebody to remember every single email, but there have been lots of instances where there have been general questions that you would expect them to remember, and their memory seems faulty.
If their memory is faulty when it should be something you should remember, if they are slipping up like you're saying that they are they at risk for perjuring themselves?
Theoretically, anytime that you lie on the stand, you're at risk for perjuring yourself. Of course, it's difficult to prove what somebody remembers in their own head. And that's why it's a convenient response to questions on the stand. I don't remember. Well, hard to prove that you can't remember something. But certainly, anytime that you're, playing with the truth, you're putting yourself at risk. I haven't seen instances here where it's become blatant enough that you would expect a perjury charge. But this is a civil case, and the judge can, infer things based on whether he thinks that the people on the stand are being honest or not. So it might come back to hurt them, even if it doesn't result in perjury charges.
Dan, you and I talked before Ivanka took the stand, and you said that you didn't think she was going to save her father, but only because there was no saving him to be done. Do you think she moved the needle in any way to either help her dad or throw him under the bus, perhaps hurt him?
I don't really think that she did. It didn't make any sense to me going in, these ideas that she was going to throw him under the bus. I don't think that she did that. I also don't think that she saved him because, as I said before, there's just no saving to be done. The amount of documentation in this case showing that Donald Trump was responsible for these asset valuations that were inflated is enormous. And his name is all over all of these documents. His son's names are all over all of these documents. The state has an enormous amount of emails showing their involvement in various parts of the calculation. So even if they try to distance themselves on the stand, as Ivanka did and her brothers did before them, although they might not be giving much ammunition to the state, they don't really need it. The state has what it has, and it's very damning, and that's why the judge already ruled on parts of these cases before testimony even began.
She was calm. She was cautious on the stand. She chose her words carefully. This really differed from her own father's testimony. But how did her testimony differ from from her brothers, Don Jr. and Eric Trump?
So Don Jr. and Eric Trump are defendants in the case. That's the biggest difference with them and Ivanka Trump. Because she left the family business to go to the White House, she got out of being a defendant on this case because of the statute of limitations. Her testimony was just more calm, less tense than her brother Eric. That was a pretty contentious testimony. Don Jr. had a different demeanor. He was almost playful at times on the stand, cracking jokes with the judge and with the state. And Ivanka was just very serious, and her answers tended to be short. She wasn't generally trying to evade the question by giving a long-winded answer about something that wasn't relevant to the question. She just tried to be disciplined, short, concise, and to not give too much away.
Did anything surprise you either from her testimony or just from being in the courthouse in general this week?
Donald Trump was on the stand on Monday. There were a lot of surprises there. Obviously, he went after the state, at one point was yelling at the judge. That was surprising. Donald Trump and Ivanka Trump have very different outward demeanors, although they do, carry some of the same inner traits. They're both very good at branding themselves. Neither of them is above lying to the media about assets. But on the stand, it would be hard to imagine two people presenting themselves more differently. And it was striking to me just how different those two testimonies were, given that they both were involved in lying about Donald Trump's assets back in the day.
Dan, you've been following this story now for years. You're also in the room as this case is unfolding in the Manhattan courthouse. So do you think there's anything missing from the national conversation that you want to express now?
Well, I think that a lot of the coverage about this case has been focused on legal issues, Trump's outbursts. There's been a lot of bickering between the lawyers and the judge. I think that one of the things that some people are missing is that ultimately this comes down to math and to numbers. And putting together somebody's net worth is just one big calculation. And so when you really start working down a level into what are the inputs into that calculation, that's where this becomes much more black and white. And I think that that's a misperception that a lot of people have, where they think, everybody fudges a little bit their numbers, and maybe Trump was just doing that. The difference here is that these underlying inputs, the ones that are objective, how many square feet you have, how many acres you have, what somebody told you to use as a cap rate, these underlying inputs that are all critical to figuring out what somebody's overall net worth was, just across the board, time after time, they were incorrect and intentionally so. And that's where the Trumps have a really, really difficult time in this case, is explaining those discrepancies on things that aren't matters of judgment, but are matters of fact.
Can you quantify just how incorrect these numbers? The math isn't adding up by a lot. How egregious is that, if you could quantify it for us?
It depends on the asset, and it depends on the year. In later years, the Trump organization got closer in some of their numbers than they were initially. But, the easiest to understand example of this, which is one that keeps coming up, is Donald Trump's penthouse. So, Donald Trump, his penthouse is 10,996 square feet. The internal math that the Trump organization was using to calculate Donald Trump's net worth for years listed it at 30,000 square feet. Now, Donald Trump on the stand claimed that he knew that that was a mistake, and that once he saw it, he instructed them to go back and change the numbers and fix them to a more accurate number. That is not plausible at all. Donald Trump himself was saying that the penthouse was 33,000 square feet, so an even larger number than what was listed on the calculations that the Trump organization was using. And even after he had been called out on this lie and was under testimony, under oath, in an open court, he still couldn't bring himself to say the actual size of the penthouse. When they asked him how big it was, remember, it's 10,996 square feet, he said, oh, it's something like 11, 12, or 13,000 square feet. He just couldn't quite help himself but continued to exaggerate it a little bit more.
And Dan, what are we looking out for next when it comes to this case specifically?
So the defense is now going to start calling witnesses. We expect Don Jr. to be on the stand again on Monday. And then they'll be calling various experts, probably people with appraisal experience, and arguing that, all of this stuff is subjective and, Trump was allowed to make the claims that he was making because he himself is a real estate expert. Again, where they're going to run into trouble is, yes, some parts of valuations are subjective. Some parts of valuations are not subjective. For example, how many square feet is in your penthouse?
Dan Alexander, per usual, thank you so much for your reporting. I hope you come back on as the trial continues onward. Dan Alexander, thanks so much.
Happy to do so. Thank you.